The story began in the Xinjiang continent. There was a great power to cultivate immortals, and an immortal said something when he broke through. It was a bald, half-naked man surrounded by broken rock debris, and as he introduced himself as Garbage Ash, he said that he had discovered an unusual new version of immortal cultivation. He claimed that it would only take 3 minutes of doing what he did for one to definitely fall in love with immortal cultivation. Since then, the Xinjiang continent hastily started a generation of major immortal cultivation. At Jiangping City, a small town where mortals lived and worked in peace, pillars of light could be seen in the distance. The residents rejoiced because those pillars of light meant that someone had made a breakthrough, and one color even indicated that someone had broken through the realm of the great martial master. But among the celebrating people, one of them seemed to be so displeased by the events that they even clicked their tongue while lounging on a chair. It was Yifeng, a transverser, who looked at the scene with a bored and dissatisfied face as he wondered which fucker was so lucky to break through. Yifeng reminisced about what happened 5 years ago. He had played the immortal cultivation game for 90 hours continuously, which had earned him the traversal achievement abbreviation, Sudden Death. When he first arrived in the world of cultivating immortals, he was half naked and he saw a lot of flying rocks, buildings, and people. It was like a dream, and he thought that he was great. Although he had been a little shocked at first, he had immediately calmed down. While the floating people behind him were fighting, he scratched his head and thought about how it was only logical that if someone crossed over, they usually had a system or something. Suddenly, something choked the life out of Yifeng. His eyes were bloodshot, he coughed up blood, and he didn't know what was going on. A muscular, deformed creature with a needle between its legs and a rectangular box on its head was squeezing Yifeng's head between his biceps, and a loud crack was heard as he told Yifeng that he had called him in time. He told Yifeng that it had been nice to meet him with a smirk on his face. He flexed his muscles and raised his thumb while introducing himself as the savior that every transverser looked forward to the most. He was surrounded by sparkles as he raised his 2 thumbs up and called himself the System Golden Finger. Yifeng was on all fours. He trembled as he looked up while the needle twinkled in front of him. The System Golden Finger rested his head on the palm of his hand and said that it was really troublesome if Yifeng stared at him like that. But it was not surprising for him because, after all, his figure counted as one of the best in the Golden Finger world. But then Yifeng started to puke rainbows, which made the System Golden Finger raise his needle off the ground and yell at Yifeng, asking if he was trying to humiliate him. The System Golden Finger flexed his muscles again and told Yifeng to listen because what was next was that he would acquire a system of martial art unparalleled in the world. It could be the art of boxing, swordsmanship, rod method, sword technique, palm technique, forging technique, drawing book, and they were all on par with gods, which made Yifeng excited. He thought about how great it was and said that in that way, he could cultivate in that world of immortality. He had already imagined himself meditating in the sky and practicing divine power, fighting with people and exterminating the sect. And lastly, he imagined himself surrounded by women and having a beautiful harem, and he was so thrilled to think about it. Floating in front of Yifeng, the System Golden Finger confidently told him that he would help him upgrade all his martial skills to the maximum level and mentioned that there was also a 600 square meter martial arts gym for him to start the game while nonchalantly making the gym appear out of thin air. Yifeng pumped his fist, tears filled the corners of his eyes, and he felt great and said that he was finally ready to start his immortal cultivation journey. The System Golden Finger was dumbfounded when he heard what Yifeng said, and he was speechless for a moment, confused about what an immortal cultivation journey was. With a stern face, the System Golden Finger pointed at the rectangular box on his head where the words spiritual root were written, and he told Yifeng that in order to cultivate, he must have that. Yifeng froze in place, and his face turned pale as he thought about his spiritual roots. The System Golden Finger then told Yifeng that it was not his responsibility, and that there were people who had traveled through that were waiting for his salvation. So he said goodbye to Yifeng and quickly disappeared into thin air, leaving the half-naked Yifeng with his crumbling martial arts gym. Yifeng was petrified, and his body was filled with sweat as he tried to figure out what had just happened. He came to the Jiangping Spiritual Root Testing Center, and as he placed his index finger on a glowing device, it announced that there were no spiritual roots. Yifeng cursed as he knelt on the ground while the receptionist at the center was speechless. The receptionist turned pale due to surprise, and grabbing the device in his hands, he cursed and exclaimed that everyone had spiritual roots and that he had never seen anyone without them, so he questioned if Yifeng was human. Yifeng was again petrified when the receptionist told him with all due respect that the road to become immortal was not his destiny. In 5 years, Yifeng had repeatedly gone to the Jiangping City Spiritual Root Testing Center, and he still remembered the countless times he had placed his index finger on the device and been told that he had no spiritual root. He convinced himself that it was not a big deal if he couldn't dominate the world, stand on top of the plane, or feel the thrill of advancement like the great vault of the sky, as all of those things had nothing to do with him. Martial practitioner, martial master, martial grandmaster, martial venerable, martial king, martial emperor, martial ancestor, martial celestial, martial saint, and martial supreme, all these levels of advancement crumpled and scattered, like leaves being blown by the wind. Yifeng felt like he was lounging, surrounded by nothingness, while he lounged under an umbrella in what looked like the town square with the System Golden Fingers monument behind him, and he said that everything was meaningless, imagining himself kneeling in front of a main character who had multiple images of other main characters behind him and being told that people who had no spiritual roots could never be the main character. Yifeng thought that it was better to make salted fish. Yifeng suddenly stood up, and his body shuddered as he raised his arms in the air and stretched. He frowned as he stared at his small piggy bank, and he thought that it seemed that in his life, he could only have set up a stall, sold books, recruited members, and so on because otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to survive in that world. Suddenly, a cute orange-haired kid with big round eyes appeared, and she looked amazed while she stared at something that had caught her attention. That kid caught Yifeng's attention. The kid was with a white-haired, beautiful girl. The kid excitedly approached Yifeng's stall, called her sister's attention to have a look, and said that she had never seen those books, and Yifeng thought that they were cultivators and that they were definitely rich people. While thinking that he was going to serve them with the attitude of a gentleman, Yifeng gracefully greeted them with a smile on his face and asked how he might help them. Although she was surprised to see someone who had such a refined temperament in Jiangping City and felt that it was a pity that he was just an ordinary human being. The white-haired lady looked at Yifeng with a deadpan expression while she called for the little kid, Liu Lai, and told her that they should go. Grabbing all the books and holding them like they were a stack of playing cards, Yifeng asked for them to wait a moment, and he showed the books to Liu Lai, saying that he thought that she had wonderful bones and an extraordinary talent. He told her that she was a martial arts genius who had never been seen in a million years, so those martial arts secrets that he drew, which he was selling for 10 gold each, he would sell them to her for half the price. And upon hearing what he said, Liu Lai smiled brightly while pointing at herself, confirming with him if she really was a genius. Winking at Yifeng, Liu Lai pointed at him and said that she would choose Master Ma's lightning whiplash. To Yifeng's surprise, the white-haired lady grabbed Liu Lai by the hair and told her that they should go, saying that it was better to spend money in useful places than anything else. But Liu Lai thrashed around, trying to get out of her sister's grasp, asking her to let her go, and saying that she wanted the book. But the white-haired lady did not listen to her and dragged her away, questioning her for having the leisure time to read books when they were in a critical situation at Castle Peak Gate. However, Liu Lai continued to flail her arms and drag her feet on the ground, saying that she did not care, and that she wanted her to buy the book for her. Liu Lai struck a nerve, and it made the white-haired lady so mad that her nerves popped out of her forehead while she scolded Liu Lai and reminded her that they were both immortal cultivators, so there was no point in buying ordinary human drawing books. Yifeng cursed, and he was also fuming mad as he stood in his stall. He was pouting because he wanted to move but didn't dare to. Liu Lai then yelled in a tantrum that she wanted to buy the book, and her body suddenly grew big and muscular. Confusion and surprise filled the atmosphere. In a blink of an eye, there was a hole on the ground with smoke coming out of it, and Liu Lai, who was still big and muscular, was happily looking at the book that looked so tiny in her hands while she called on her sister, saying that they should go. Meanwhile, Yifeng's jaw dropped, and he was not able to react while the white-haired lady stood in front of his stall, tossing something and saying that it was the money. The white-haired lady asked Liu Lai if she was satisfied, to which Liu Lai confirmed and said thank you. Liu Lai started to shrink as the white-haired lady reminded her to control herself in front of a mortal next time because of her physique. While they were walking away, Yifeng came back to his senses and yelled at them, telling them to get their asses back there because his book was 10 golds each. He continued to yell and called them shitty cultivators, threatening them to never show up in front of him again or he would blow their asses off. A few moments later, Liu Lai and the white-haired lady were both leaving Jiangping City, and the white-haired lady let out a big sigh while massaging the back of her neck as Liu Lai continued to hound her about the book, saying that it was really beautiful and that she had never seen something like that before, so they should read it together. The white-haired lady sighed in defeat as she agreed with Liu Lai to have a look, and as she reached out for the book, she told herself to just deal with it. The white-haired lady's face contorted into a bewildered expression as she flipped through the book and struggled to make sense of what she was reading. Suddenly, the book produced a massive amount of aura that blew her hair up, and she screamed with her eyes wide open in surprise. What she felt at that moment were things that only the cultivators could sense, and it felt like loneliness being abandoned by the galaxy, like being surrounded by enthusiasm in a festival carnival. With the system golden finger radiating white loops behind the white-haired lady, two other similar creatures were depicted behind her as well, and as she wondered what it was that was desperately trying so hard to fill her loophole and make her realize it, she screamed and drooled as her clothes turned to shreds, which made her realize that it was pure martial arts. With her clothes turned to shreds, a black octopus wrapped its tentacles around her, depicting a lewd scene. Her face was extremely red, and she couldn't help but moan as the tentacles poked her cheeks and other parts of her body. She slumped on the ground with the book in front of her, trying to catch her breath. Her face was still extremely red, she was sweating profusely, and tears formed at the corner of her eye as she thought about how she had been working so hard to break through and how all her efforts were in vain. But after reading only one page of Yifeng's picture book, she broke through the great martial master in an instant. With a worried look on her face, Luo Lai suddenly approached the white-haired lady, asking her if she was okay because her face was so red. And the white-haired lady was startled when she realized that even Luo Lai had broken through several times to comprehend the realm of the martial master. Depicting the image of Yifeng looming over her, the white-haired lady's face turned pale as she realized that Yifeng could be a world-class expert, and then she decided that she must tell her master about it as soon as possible. In the forest, while wielding his spear infused with a golden aura, Lu Qingshan, the head of the Castle Peak Gate, who was then at the realm of martial spirit, lunged towards an injured beast that seemed to have been battling a group of men in front of it. Some of those men had already lain lifeless on the ground, and he announced that he was there to harvest the beast's head. As he was about to hit the beast, Lu Qingshan was surprised when a purple aura, appearing as a much stronger force, hit it before he did, and the beast's blood splattered all over the place. Lu Qingshan's eyes were filled with terror, bulging out of their sockets, as someone called out to him and claimed that they had killed that monstrous beast. The monstrous beast now lay lifeless on the ground, and as the person with the purple aura absorbed the monster beast's power, he thanked the Castle Peak Gate, who stood behind him, for their hard work so that he could step ahead of them without any fuss. Lu Qingshan was enraged and told the person that he had no martial art ethics because their Castle Peak Gate had hunted that demon for months, and they had suffered heavy casualties, but he simply went there to pick up the ready-made products. The person, Ning Xianwu, who was the ancestor of the Xuanwu sect, broke through the realm of the martial king and told Lu Qingshan to come if he wanted to because he wouldn't mind giving him a death ride before the official competition. Lu Qingshan's face contorted with fear, and sweat ran down his face as he realized that they were not in a good situation because the spiritual power Ning Xianwu had just absorbed had helped him break through the realm of the martial king. Ning Xianwu, backed up by his unscathed sect members, stood in front of Lu Qingshan, who only had his injured sect members behind him, and confidently pointed at Lu Qingshan, declaring that if Lu Qingshan could beat him in the death fight 3 days later, he would let him go. However, he added that it was a pity that his Xuanwu sect would eventually swallow up Lu Qingshan's Castle Peak Gate. This made Lu Qingshan cast a downward glare and grit his teeth, unable to say anything in response. On the other hand, a lady up on stage announced something important, and she told her audience that if they wanted to resolve the crisis, it could only be done if they asked for big help. Her audience, including Yifeng, looked at her with deadpan expressions on their faces, and she cursed in her mind as the rumors of Cultivator's disputes could no longer make the group of leisurely guys in front of her interested, and she worried that she was going to be unemployed. Among the audience, one commented that the issue that the lady mentioned was less hot and asked for the next issue, while another commented that the rhythm of the burden was not right, and Yifeng thought that it was just a territorial contention. The whole blood boiled. Meanwhile, at the Castle Peak Gate, 2 young cultivators were practicing with their weapons, and as one of them mentioned that the duel was only a few days away, the other said that he didn't know what the use of practicing was at the moment, and in response, the other one said that their master, Lu Qingshan, had been practicing hard in retreat, so he presumed that he would be able to break through before the death fight. Suddenly, a fat old man with his nerves popping out of his face appeared between them and told them to shut up as he had been with Lu Qingshan for more than 30 years, and he said that Lu Qingshan had always been indomitable when he encountered a crisis. The old man declared that Lu Qingshan never backed down, and unbeknownst to him, Lu Qingshan was meditating near where they were, and he could hear their conversation. Lu Qingshan stared ahead seriously when the old man said that the more they faced the difficulties, the more their determination would burst out. Out of nowhere, Lu Qingshan bit a piece of clothing to suppress his urge to scream in frustration, and while he trembled, tears formed at the corners of his eyes as he cursed in his mind. Doubt splattered in his mind like blue ink as he questioned himself about how he could beat Ning Xianwu in his current state when he had been in the realm of martial spirit for many years, but never made a breakthrough, so he knew that he would definitely be killed. As he sobbed silently, someone called out to him and announced that Lan Zu had something to ask him, so he immediately composed himself and gave an affirmative response. He cleared his throat and told them to come in. A few moments later, someone placed Yifeng's Master Ma's lightning whiplash on the ground. It was Lan Zu, the white-haired, beautiful lady, and after she explained, Lu Qingshan was speechless for a moment. Lu Qingshan confirmed with Lan Zu if what she had really said was that the book was from a mortal, and as she nervously confirmed and told him that Yifeng might be a peerless master in the cultivation world, Lu Qingshan cut her off and told her it was nonsense. Lu Qingshan was enraged, and he grabbed the book as he lectured Lan Zu, saying that as a major disciple of the Qingshan sect, she had been simply stupid for not concentrating on her cultivation to make breakthroughs and that she had been deceived by street folks. As Lu Qingshan said that the book was nothing out of the ordinary and useless, Lan Zu requested for him to calm down and have a look at the book first, and she said that if she was lying, then she would be willing to accept any punishment. Lu Qingshan agreed, and as soon as he opened the book, something snapped inside him that he was not able to comprehend. A very strong aura surged out of the book that made the pages flutter, and as Lu Qingshan looked at the book and felt the strong aura, his eyes bulged out like they were about to pop out of their sockets, and his mouth was wide open due to shock. A sphere of colorful aura emerged, and a silhouette of a human being meditating at the center of it could be seen. The aura surged through Lu Qingshan, and he was taken to a prairie with the sunset in front of him. Shortly, he realized that he was in an enlightening condition, and he could not believe that he was in his own mind. And he thought about how those previous days, he had been more like running away from the pressure to fight the Xuanwu sect instead of closing up on it, because since he had become the sect master, no one had ever tested his strength for so many years. Suddenly, a man with elastic arms, who had the system golden finger behind him, moved his arms at a very rapid speed as he said that the looseness was tight and the tightness got tighter. The elastic man was hitting Lu Qingshan, and his body was filled with bruises from the hits, but as he drooled and tears ran down his cheeks, Lu Qingshan could not help but moan and have a lewd expression on his face as he exclaimed that he had finally broken through. A pillar of light emerged at the castle peak gate, which surprised its members. On the other hand, Yifeng, who lounged on his chair while holding a bowl of noodles in his hands, cursed as he saw the pillar of light, wondered which fucker broke through again, and complained that the noodles didn't smell good anymore. Back at the castle peak gate, while Lu Qingshan bent over, trying to reach out for Yifeng's smoking book on the ground, Lan Zu, who sat behind him, rejoiced that he had really been able to break through to the realm of Martial King. With his face and ears still beet red, Lu Qingshan called Lan Zu. A pleasing light radiated from Lu Qingshan while he was still blushing, and he told Lan Zu that the opportunity to kill the Xuanwu sect had come. As Lu Qingshan told Lan Zu that Yifeng's cultivation was unfathomable for being able to easily draw a book with great martial intent, and told her that she must follow him to pay respect to the martial master. The image of her questioning Liu Lai about the point of buying a mortal's painting book filled Lan Zu's mind, which made her panic as she spoke so arrogantly that she offended Yifeng without thinking. Imagining Yifeng looming over the land and destroying it with the wave of his hand, Lan Zu thought that if he were angry, he would definitely destroy the castle peak gate. Meanwhile, with a fiery look in his eyes, Yifeng stared intently at something. An ominous aura shrouded him as he declared that it was time. But then he smiled full of content as he stood up in front of a cooking pot, and he was happy that he could finally eat the meat while thinking that mortal exercise methods were not popular in that world at all. So when he finally had two idiot cultivators who bought a book for a cold coin, he exchanged it with 2 katas of meat, which was equivalent to half a kilo. Meanwhile, 3 men chased a purple wild dog who had stolen their meat. As the wild dog ran with the meat in its mouth, in the dog's mind, it called them lowly humans and told them to stop chasing him, claiming that eating their meat was a great honor. However, no one could hear him. Portraying its original form, the wild dog introduced itself as the prince of the wolf clan in the demon world. It stated that its realm was equivalent to martial soul. If it hadn't been for being framed by its fellow clan and its spiritual powers almost being exhausted, it would have swallowed them a long time ago. As the prince of the wolf clan called them fragile and stupid humans, it spotted Yifeng from behind. Yifeng was squatting in front of his cooking pot. The wild dog grinned evilly, thinking that a mortal dared to stand in its way. Believing that killing a defenseless mortal was easy despite its weak spiritual power, the prince of the wolf clan released its spiritual power, portraying its original form. It lunged at the clueless Yifeng from behind, telling him to die. Yifeng was startled and looked behind him as he sensed the prince of the wolf clan's aura. They locked eyes with each other. Suddenly, Yifeng grabbed the prince of the wolf clan by the head, surprising and confusing both of them. As Yifeng smiled and asked when the prince of the wolf clan had come to Jiangping City, the prince of the wolf clan trembled, his mouth wide open. He couldn't believe that his power didn't work. The prince of the wolf clan was furious at Yifeng for daring to make fun of him. He released a very strong lightning-like aura while yelling. Yifeng remained unscathed, but the meat he had been cooking behind him spilled completely on the ground. When Yifeng saw it, his eyes turned dark. Meanwhile, the prince of the wolf clan, still hanging by Yifeng's hand, had his mouth wide open and trembled, unable to believe that his attack hadn't affected Yifeng at all. While Yifeng continued to hold on to him, the prince of the wolf clan looked anxious, trying to figure out what Yifeng had just done. He felt his whole body trembling, and as he wondered if he was scared, he quickly dismissed the idea as a joke, as he could not be afraid of a mortal because he wouldn't be scared even if he was besieged by 5 cultivators in the martial spirit realm. But as Yifeng's face contorted in anger, nerves popped out of his face, and he pointed at him, calling him a cutie and saying that he looked delicious. The prince of the wolf clan could not help but internally scream at the realization that Yifeng wanted to eat him, and he wondered who Yifeng was. While Lu Qingshan and Lan Zu traversed the skies, Yifeng stared confusedly at the prince of the wolf clan who lay on the ground, and he seemed like he was excessively scared as his soul had left his body while he wondered how strong Yifeng really was. At the Jiangping market, a little injured girl was thrown out for sneaking into the Qingshan gate, and they mocked her for looking at her virtues and wanting to cultivate when she didn't even have spiritual roots. They warned her that if they caught her sneaking in again, they would kill her. Feeling defeated, she suddenly knelt on the ground. She slammed her small fist into the ground and called out to her god, and as the little girl, Zhang King, questioned if she really was a loser who would never be able to change her fate, she apologized to her uncle for having to let him down. Suddenly, Yifeng, who had the prince of the wolf clan tied beside him, called out to her and told her that, seeing the posture of her body, he wondered if she intended to steal his meat. He then added that if she wanted to eat, then she would have to pay money because although his barbecue was well known in the world, he wouldn't share it with her even if she called her dad. Zhang King stood up, and she was enraged at how Yifeng was taking advantage of her indiscriminately, and she declared that she wouldn't eat his meat even if she starved to death. Zhang King turned her back on Yifeng, who was still cooking the meat, and while she was walking away, the smell of it reached her nose. Zhang King closed her eyes from embarrassment as she grabbed a barbecue in each of her hands while she kept on telling Yifeng that she had already told him that she was not eating his food, and Yifeng was not able to do anything but yell at her for robbing him of his barbecue. Yifeng's face suddenly turned serious as he looked at Zhang King. His eyes filled with concern as he pointed out that she had been driven out by the Qingshan sect. With her mouth still full, Zhang King was surprised at what Yifeng had just said, as it was already obvious, and then she added, correcting Yifeng, that she was a boy. With Zhang King looking crestfallen behind him, Yifeng returned to cooking his barbecue, and with a puzzled expression on his face, he said that with such a good haircut, instead of becoming an idol, Zhang King had come to cultivate into immortals, and he wondered what was wrong with the people of the country he was currently in, while in his mind, he was thinking that Zhang King had the same experience as him, and it was not as good. As he finished cooking the barbecue, Yifeng pointed out to Zhang King that he had nowhere to go and he just happened to be short of a man, so he told him to follow him, and he tossed the key to the martial arts hall at Zhang King and told him to take it. Even though he was taken by surprise, Zhang King was still able to catch the keys. Merrily walking away, Yifeng told Zhang King that he was going to buy some seasonings, so he should go back to the martial arts hall first and look after the house, but Zhang King told him that he still didn't agree to be his staff. Zhang King blushed as he clutched the keys close to his chest, and as he contemplated what was wrong with Yifeng, wondering how he could say those things, he decided to just forget them because he realized that if he could have a job in Jiangping, his parents would be more relieved.